Thank you very much, Samir. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I would love to talk to everyone about what the zen of sustainability is. I've been involved with Lean Six Sigma since about 1998. And one of the biggest issues that we have fought with and struggled with and tried to conquer is this element of how do you sustain the gains. Now, they asked me to tell you a little bit about myself. I spent 33 years in electronic warfare, information warfare, and counterterrorism, trained SEALs, Delta Force, Spy War operators, and I was the only non-flight rated program manager for one of the top gun ranges, both in Europe and up in Alaska. And I had an opportunity to work with really world-class, high-performance individuals and teams. And team dynamics is my passion. Leadership is really what I really focus a lot on. And I got involved with Lean Six Sigma, not because it was a flavor of the month, but because as a program manager, I saw this as a really excellent way of driving excellence into the organization and achieving things that we weren't able to achieve any other way. I actually got involved with Lean Six Sigma early, like I said, and I wound up being the lead subject matter expert for program management for a Fortune 25 company, where I was able to implement and design the Master Black Belt program for Lockheed Martin. And I've trained and certified 73 other Master Black Belts. I am a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt Sensei, and I really enjoyed this. But here's the thing that I tell people that really surprised them about myself. I tell them the most worthless thing in the entire world is a great idea. You know, each and every one of you out there in the audience today is going to have 3 or 4 great ideas before you go to sleep tonight. So what? What do we do with them? The rarest thing in the world is a great idea that's fully implemented and sustained in the marketplace or in our personal lives. That's incredibly rare. So as we go through this, what we've done is we've trained ourselves to be very, very familiar and comfortable with the failure of change. In fact, what we found is about 60 to 80% of all change initiatives fail. And I'm sorry, but I cannot find that to be acceptable. It's too expensive to go change. It's too traumatic to put our people through that and to have that kind of a failure rate. And here's what we've done. I and my team have spent the last 5 to 6 years really focusing in on what is it that causes things to fail? What is it about change management that we have not done well? And we found that there were several elements. It can be the ideas may not be great. It can be a poor strategic plan. Oftentimes we fail to communicate it properly, and we often implement it poorly or not as effectively as we could. There's one element in particular, though, and that is the follow-through. Let me show you a great example. I took this picture somewhere in Europe. It is a great idea to keep your nuclear bunkers secret, but it's not a great idea to post that on an interstate highway information sign. Poor execution, poor follow-through is one of the things that really hammers us when we're trying to sustain improvements and to keep good ideas alive. It can often be what I call the delta between success and failure. Let's look at what I'm talking about here. Physics is a passion of mine. It's a hobby. I love it, so you'll have to bear with me for a moment. But the second law of thermodynamics, which basically is the law of entropy, says that all things tend to disintegrate from order to chaos and from order to disorder. This is an event that we did with a hospital, and you can see in the third quarter of 2008 where the patient satisfaction score was before we started the event. When we finished the event on how to discharge patients from the hospital, the patient satisfaction went up significantly. And these are Press-Ganey scores. And a change of 1 to 2% in Press-Ganey is very large. A change of this magnitude in this short period of time in the hospital Press-Ganey score is pretty significant. And as you can see, they sustained those gains over a couple of quarters, but then the law of entropy kicked in, and we saw that things started going back to the status quo. And we were headed on a trend to be back where we had never done the event before. And frankly, in years past, far too many of our efforts had this result. There was no way we could see the results after we'd been going 6 to 9 months. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're having trouble seeing your I still see your slide, but we don't see the graphics on the slide that you're referring to. Oh, there they are.
There they are.
Thank you very much.
Technology, you got to love it. But you can see this kind of represented the typical event that we all get engaged in, where the employees get very excited about it. There's a lot of change. They can see it. The results and the metrics are spectacular. And then over a period of time, it goes back to the status quo. What we've done is we've taken a really hard look at why that is and trying to understand what's going on. Now, I'm an electronics engineer, so you know there's always got to be a formula. I apologize for the formula. Here's what the formula is. It says the pain of change must be less than the pain of the status quo plus the pain of the effort to change. It's all about pain. We're not going to do anything unless we're really forced to go do it. It's human nature. And what we've learned is this formula really explains human behavior to a great degree in terms of why people resist change. Now, as we go through this, you can analyze where are you in the formula. Is the change that you're asking people to do more painful than the status quo and the pain that they're going to have to do to make the efforts? If so, you're not going to sustain those initiatives. You're not going to get buy-in for it. You really have to understand the culture of your organization and your team dynamics. It is all about people. It's all about how we can learn to influence people. And here's the thing, whether you're a green belt, black belt, master black belt sensei, doesn't make any difference. If you're going to be an effective change agent, you've really got to understand how to look at these things from the perspective of understanding behavior and how to motivate and encourage people. Now, the issue for this is pretty easy. Since it's basic algebra, we can change the balance of the equation. What do we have to do to take pain from the left side of the equation and move it to the right side of the equation? Well, I'm glad you asked that, because the first thing is we can understand a little bit more about why people resist change. What a lot of people don't understand or realize is there's 4 levels to resistance. The first level says, I don't understand it. They ask questions that are based upon getting more information to help them decide whether or not they like the change, whether they understand the change, and whether they want to engage in the change. Level 2 says, oh, I understand it. I don't like it. The change that you're proposing may threaten me. It may impact my security or the organization of my people. It may take money from my budget. It may require me to go do things that I'm not having to do now that I don't want to do. Level 2 resistance says that they really understand the change, but they don't like the change. Level 3 says, oh, I understand it. I don't like you. There's a personal component to this. You remember when last month I was trying to make my change case in front of the staff meeting, and you shot me down, and now you want me to help you put your change out there? No, I'm sorry, not this time. Or it may be that they think that your idea or your element of change is going to threaten them and what they're doing. But there's a personal component behind that. The 4th level that people resist is the most dynamic, and it's the most difficult to overcome, and that is, oh, I understand it. I think you're evil. Now, we have found that this is becoming a more and more prevalent level of resistance. I'll give you 2 examples. They're political and from both ends of the spectrum. Whether you love him or hate him, George W. Bush, by the end of his 2nd term, people ascribed to him almost everything he wanted to do as trying to hurt people or to take things away from people. They tuned him out. They quit listening to him. What he was trying to do, people viewed as evil. A large portion of the population did. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Nancy Pelosi, completely different party, completely different end, but she's also reached that point where there's a large percentage of the population that's no longer willing to listen to a single thing that she says because they ascribe what she's trying to do is trying to hurt people. And level 4 is not always political. I can give you an example in the financial realm. Bernie Madoff, the program where he did that basically stole so much money from so many individual investors. Nobody's willing to listen to what he has to say because they ascribe he's evil. You can deal with level 1 resistance very easily by just explaining to the person what it is about it, how it's going to work. That they're looking for information. Level 2 is a little bit more difficult. You've got to really understand why they don't like it. If you simply give them information, it's not going to help them. They already understand the information. What they're needing to understand is how it's going to impact them and what's the benefit. I call that the WIFM, what's in it for me. Level 3, this is the easiest to recognize, but it's the most difficult to deal with because I've got to have some kind of a personal conversation with this individual to understand, is it personally against me? Is it something I've done? Or is it personally against me because of what we're trying to implement? Or is it personally against me because of the threat that this is supplying? If it's level 4, fortunately, it's the easiest to recognize, but it's also almost impossible to overcome. You've got to move to a different area and start over. But understanding the levels of resistance go a long ways toward helping you become far more influential and increasing your ability to sustain your ideas and to sustain your change initiatives. If we understand why people resist, then we can come up with strategies to change those negatives to a strong positive. Now, let's look at how you can deal with some of this resistance. You've got to learn to be influential. You can't make people change. You can't force people to change. You actually can't even motivate people. You can create an environment to where they want to come do something. And this takes a lot of work. And the one thing that I've learned is none of the people who are resisting change are bored. None of them lack passion. In fact, most of the passion is often found on the side of the equation that values the resistors. The people who are implementing the change don't have as much passion as the people who are resisting the change, and that leads you to a situation where your change initiatives can fail. You really also need to ask people for their help. I have found that a lot of our belts and a lot of our Lean Six Sigma practitioners seem sometimes to be loath to ask people for their help. It's almost viewed as a sign of weakness. In fact, if you watch NCIS on TV, Gibbs always tells people if you say you're sorry, it's a sign of weakness. I don't think this is saying you're sorry. I think this is saying we need everybody pulling the wagon. So don't be afraid to figure out the right way to address people and ask for their assistance. Oftentimes they can come up with ideas you and your team may not have that can provide that breakthrough that gets more people on board. Always try to figure out how to identify those 4 levels of resistance and change it from a negative to a positive. That requires you to listen with the willingness to be influenced. If you're just listening to them and waiting for the gap for you to jump in and explain why they're wrong, you're probably not going to get them on your side. You have to really listen to them and understand what it is they're trying to tell you. I have found that even in the most critical of comments and the most vicious of resistance, there's always some grain of truth. There's always something in there that we need to pay attention to. So I call it listening with the willingness to be influenced. And the other thing, the reason why influence becomes so incredibly powerful is I have found that true leadership is the exercise of influence in the absence of authority. I can't make someone do something, but if I can convince them that where we're going is where we will both benefit, we can get there. Think about this for a second. Who are some of the most effective leaders in your organization? It's the informal leaders, the ones who have no authority, no title, and they're oftentimes engaged in destructive behavior, but they're able to influence people to go do things that are often counterproductive because someone has been more influential than the legitimate leaders. So understanding how to increase your ability to be influential is the hallmark of being an effective Lean Six Sigma practitioner. you've also got to be able to show them the whiffle, the what's in it for me. You can't expect people to do it because you say so. That doesn't work when we tell our kids, you got to do this because I say so. So why should it work with our employees? We have to really understand not just what we're trying to change, but what are their problems? How does this benefit them? What is this going to do for them? We often fall down short in our ability to communicate the benefits of the change. We think that because it's a great idea and because the leadership is saying we're going to go do it, that's all it takes. I think that's all it takes to come up with a way to have 60 to 80% failures. If you want to have a significant success rate in sustaining change, you need to understand what people are trying to solve, what keeps them awake at night. And then also, you do get more benefit from the carrot than you do the stick. In fact, when I'm doing executive coaching, I tell business leaders, you really need to be focused in on trying to provide about 75% carrot and 25% stick. If it's all stick, you get no benefit. If it's all carrot, you're not effective. But about 75% carrot, 25% stick really does work. And then the other thing is understanding that how you motivate and reward people seldom is about money. Everybody talks about money, but it's not the real issue. We surveyed a large number of master black belts to figure out what would be the best way to reward and recognize them. And when I initiated this survey, and we did it very scientifically, I really was expecting money to come in first or second, or even first and second. I was very surprised that out of 15 motivators that we listed, money came in number 9. 9! What came in first was recognition. And for my master black belts, because we were having a problem, our training program was exceptionally good, and as soon as we trained them, they got snapped up by other companies. And we were trying to find a way to reward and motivate them, and the corporation wouldn't let us use money to go do it. So I was trying to figure out, how do we do this? And it turned out, for this particular group, the leather pilot jackets, you know, what they call the bomber jacket, with their name and their master black belt rating, the certified master black belt rating, turned out to be huge, huge, all out of proportion to what it cost us to buy the jackets. But you need to figure out for your culture and your organization what is the key motivator. And don't be surprised when you find out that it's not money. It will be something else. Money is basically a hygiene factor. The moment they get the money, they're okay for a couple of 3 weeks, but then the same things that bothered them continue to bother them. Money is not going to motivate them. It will simply satisfy them in the short term. Our job, in order to sustain changes long term, is to find out what truly motivates people and lock into that. Now, let's talk a little bit about how change really does happen. There's 5 stages for any change initiative to go through. First, your team and the organization needs to be aware that this change has got the potential of taking place. Then there's got to be some interest developed in it. Part of this is how we sell the idea. Part of this is how people become convinced that there may be something in this that answers their whiffle. Then the third phase is they're going to evaluate this change. They're going to look at it and see, does this really provide something that's going to help us do what it is that we say needs to be done? Then they're going to try it. They're going to test drive it. They're going to run it for a trial of their own and see whether or not the hype matches the results. It's all about results. Last but not least, once they've gone through these 4 stages and the benefits are obvious, then they're willing to adopt the change. We need to understand how people work their way through this, and we can't just do change to them. We have to do change with them. Big difference between the success and the failure of most change initiatives. Let's talk about how you get to where you want to go. I found that the best way to sustain changes long term is to provide structure around it. In fact, I'll tell you, about 5 to 6 years ago, when we started down this path, we also had this 60 to 80% failure rate. And I thought, it's too expensive for my clients to spend that kind of money to get that kind of result. And it's embarrassing for me. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand this. And now we've got a measured 73.4% success ratio in sustaining changes for each action item 12 months or longer. The key to that is the structure we put around how to sustain it. We've placed a lot of structure around our tools. We've placed a lot of structure around our statistics and our mathematical rigor and methodologies. What we need to do is apply that same rigor and that same structure around how we sustain the gains long term after the event's over. First and foremost on this, you've got to have a very good action item plan. Here's a picture we took at a hospital. It's humorous. On one hand it says don't enter, then another sign on the same door says enter only. So what do? Can you go in there? Can you not go in there? As humorous as that photograph is, that's what we do to our organizations far too often. We give them conflicting messages. We give them conflicting documentation. We give them conflicting procedures, mixed messages. It is worth the time and the effort to have your action item plan be very concise, very unambiguous, very clear, specific belly buttons. And some people say, oh, wait a minute, why do you use that term belly button? Because you'll remember it. Hyman Rickover once said something that I thought was brilliant. If you can't put your finger in the belly button of the person who's responsible, nobody's responsible. And one of the failure modes that I see in action items is it'll have 2 or 3 names up there for responsibility for a single action, or a team, or a department. That's a guaranteed failure mode. People don't get things done. Individuals get things done. Committees don't do that well in terms of execution. Individuals get stuff done. And then for due dates, don't put December of 2013. Put down the specific date. What day? On December the 19th. It's due tomorrow. As long as you can be that specific, you'll find out that you increase dramatically your ability to implement these changes. In order to sustain them, you've got to have a relentless follow-up and follow-through. This is one of the major failure modes right here. We think that because it's a great idea and because we've told people that it needs to be done and somebody's volunteered to do it, we can forget about it. It'll just happen. And I'm here to tell you, it won't. It requires tremendous energy and commitment and follow-through and sometimes nagging in order to get things done because our regular jobs are happening around us. This is not our sole focus. And if you don't put continual energy into it, it will drift to a stop. There's also got to be a strong bias towards action. I spend a lot of my time listening to people explain to me how something can't be done. I don't have the slightest patience for hearing how it can't be done. The only thing I'm wanting to talk about is how can it get done? What do we have to do to go do it? You as a belt, as a Lean Six Sigma practitioner, need to have a strong bias towards getting stuff done as opposed to putting together charts and numbers and graphs. That doesn't help anything. It's necessary. That's not where the rubber meets the road. It's where things happen that people can see. Then there's got to be a culture, a real culture of accountability. Not only do you change the metrics to drive behavior, but you hold people accountable. Have you ever been in a groundhog meeting? There was a movie that came out some type of time ago called Groundhog Day. I think it was, I can't remember the actor. He's a funny comedian. He had to live the same day over and over again. It was called Groundhog Day. Well, I've been in groundhog meetings where every week the same person comes up with a slightly different reason for why something didn't happen this week, just like it didn't happen last week. We can't allow the groundhog meetings to continue. If we're serious about being change agents, we're serious about being Lean Six Sigma professionals, we need to get things done and find ways that it happens as opposed to becoming experts at explaining why it's slipping to the right. The way I look at it, you can deliver results or you can deliver excuses. You get to choose. Now, your action plan, I find that if it goes out past 90 days, it's not going to get done. Too many things happen. Too many things change and shift. Too many priorities occur that overtake an action item that's going to go out past 90 days. If it does, if you're implementing SAP That's not a single action item. That's a project. Then begin to break that action item up into individual bits and chunks to where you can put milestones against it so that you can go out and achieve it within 30 to 90 days. The follow-up belongs to the team leader, not the facilitator. I've seen a lot of black belt and master black belt facilitators that accept responsibility for doing things with the team. What I tell my people that I coach is never do for the team what the team can do for itself. And the team leader needs to own these action item plans. Also, you need to set, this is part of the sustainment plan that we'll talk about in a little bit. But before the event ends, you need to have the first follow-up meeting set, the meeting room scheduled, and the time assigned, and the invitations go out. I have heard so many people say, oh yeah, we're going to meet every 2 weeks. You go back a month later, nobody's done anything. You've got to be specific. You've got to put structure around this. And keep your sponsors and your champions involved. They're becoming good at coming to the outbriefs. And they're becoming pretty good generically at learning how to recognize the benefits that the team has provided. Where we fall down is once the event's over, we tend to just put our heads down and keep chugging. You've got to keep the sponsor and the champion involved in the progress or the lack of progress. That's what they're there for. Here's an action item. Here's an action item plan template that we've put together. Looks kind of simple, but it's very specific. We've got the action that must be done, and this is synthesized so that there's no proprietary data in here for anybody. But we've got the specific action, the specific belly button who's responsible. The problem with this, you see where the problem is? May 02. Now is May 02, is that the second day of May? Second week of May? You've got to be very specific in here. The end date, May 11th. And then we put the status in here. We love to use visual management. The red, yellow, green. When we have our follow-up meetings every 2 weeks, or whenever it is that we're going to have them, a failure mode. If you go through every action item and find out what the status is, first, most of those action items do not impact most of the people in that room. They're bored to tears. Make sure you spend the time talking about the things that impact the majority of the team. Second, I'm only going to spend the time on the follow-up meeting on the red items, the things that are in danger of not happening. If I have time, I'm going to follow up and spend time on the yellow ones, the ones that are behind schedule or in trouble. I'm not going to spend time talking about the action items that are green. I'm not going to spend time talking about the action items that are blue because blue indicates that they're completed and finalized. We're only going to spend the time where it benefits the team the most, and that's on the problem areas and the things that need to be focused. We're going to put together a communications plan. Now, this is one area where a lot of people fall very short. We have to learn, just like we write a newspaper article, we've got to address the who, what, where, when, how, and how often. We've got to make sure that we understand what we're telling people, why we're doing this change, when we're doing the change, who's doing the change, what the change is going to entail, who's going to pay for it, how's it going to be done, where's it going to be done. They need to understand this. And here's something else that I've learned. Tell them 6 to 26 times. A failure mode is we think once we tell people something once, they've gotten it. That doesn't work. People need to hear it repeatedly for 2 reasons. Number one, every time they hear it, they understand it a little bit better. Second, every time they hear it, they believe you're committed to it a little bit deeper. If I hear you say something once, it may just be something that's a spur-of-the-moment thing. But if you've told me 6 times, I know you're serious about it. Your communications plans need to be multimedia, multidimensional, multi-engagement. Here's why I say multimedia. Some people love to get emails. Some people hate emails with a purple passion. Some people love all-hands meetings. Some people would rather go anywhere in the world than an all-hands meeting. Some people love to get newsletters. Some people never, ever read those whatsoever. You've got to take every element of your communication plan and use it in a manner that gets to the most people. And no one way is going to get to every people. It's also got to be multidimensional. You've got to show people how all these different pieces fit together and why each one of them is important. And then you've got to do it multiple times. Here's a template that we put together for a communications plan. The first column says, what do we need to communicate? How are we going to communicate it? Specific notes about the elements that need to be communicated. The point of contact. Who's the person responsible for communicating this element? And then the first, second, third, and the fourth time that it's going to be communicated. And then the comprehensive communication effectiveness. We're going to measure how well people are getting this. This is a template that works generically in a lot of different organizations. It's very easy to be modified, but this helps people understand I can't just go out and do one PowerPoint presentation and tell people about it and expect that they've got it, they understand it, and that they buy into it. That's a failure mode. Now, the sustainment plan. We actually help teams put together a formal, structured sustainment plan. This plan entails very specific things like when are we going to meet? How often are we going to meet? Where are we going to meet? Who's going to chair the meetings? Who's going to track the metrics? Who's going to hold people accountable? How are we going to calculate the financial savings? How are we going to assure that our action plans and our communications plans and our enabler plans are actually being implemented and are being effective? How are we going to follow this through? How are we going to follow it up? How are we going to measure our success? It is exactly like the law of entropy when I first opened up with the slide. If you don't continually pour energy into your new process, it will eventually deteriorate until it returns back to the old process. It's got to have some structure around it. Do not think that just because we tell people that this needs to be done, that it's going to happen. We have to do the follow-up, the follow-through. It's a lot of hard work. I'm sorry, but every event that I've done as a black belt, master black belt, has taken me several weeks ahead of time to prepare and multiple weeks afterwards to ensure that we're actually doing and sustaining the things that we said that we were going to go do. We can't just go in and facilitate the event, and wash our hands, and walk away and expect it to be successful. If you don't provide the structure, you're not going to have the successful follow-through. Last but not least, we've got what we call an enabler plan. This is where we tell the executive team, here's what we need from you in order to make this process happen. We focus most of our efforts on coming up with changes that cost no money, require no investment, but occasionally there is something that needs to be done. And if this occurs, here's where we have to tell the executive team, if this doesn't happen, it's going to impact our ability to execute this new process effectively. And when we color code it red, it says if we don't get this supported, funded, or implemented, this new process will not work. If we color it yellow, it says if we don't get this funded or supported, it'll have a severe impact on the event or the process, and the potential savings that we can see will be seriously impacted. Green, well, this is nice to have, but we can figure out how to do this without it. I'd like to take a look at some failure modes, because all of us have been involved in processes and projects where we've had great success, great failures. I mean, and if you hadn't had a great failure, hang in there, Buttercup, because it's going to happen. But over the long term, things have never been as good as they could be, and that's where we really want to focus in a lot of our attention as effective change agents. And one of the big things is too much focus on the bottom line. Yes, it is about dollars. It's about money. I'm a business CEO myself. I understand more than most people. No bucks, no Buck Rogers. But you can't do everything based on money. Sometimes you have to do it because it's the right thing to do. You have to do it because it is the best thing for your customers. I tell business managers, you have to be willing to make a strategic investment in your team, in your business, and in your customers if you're going to sustain in this business and grow long term. Another one is a failure to achieve your key leadership, fully buying into what you want to go do. I was just working with a team a couple of weeks ago where we went in and we started a new engagement, and we had set it up to where the business executive was going to come in and do a kickoff and tell everybody why this was so important to the organization, why it mattered, what his expectations were, how he thought this was going to fit into the business, and where the business was going to go into 2014. It was already set up, it was prepped, it was coached, and nobody ever showed up for the meeting. There was no leadership buy-in, and you could see everybody's face on the room. They got the message. If you don't have your key leaders fully bought into what you're doing, you're going to fight an uphill battle every step of the way. Also, it can be a failure mode when your business and your organization is disconnected from the customers. For example, I've worked with a company just last month where 3 of the people came up to me and said, JR, I understand all of this stuff you're talking about, value from the customer's perspective, but you don't understand. We're different. Man, I wished I had $1 for every time somebody had told me they were different. I would have a much better retirement program, trust me. But they said, we're different. We never see customers. All we do is we see products and we see engineering drawings. Well, you know what? If it wasn't for customers, you wouldn't be doing these. Don't let people convince you that they're disconnected from the customers, because they drive everything we do. Whether you're a profit or non-profit, it is all about providing value to somebody, whether it's somebody who's paying you for it or somebody that you're collecting money to provide something for. It is about value, and it's about value from that customer. And far too often, people allow themselves to get trapped into viewing, oh, my customer is my boss, or my customer is the next step of the process, or the next department that uses what we do. I'm sorry, I don't buy that, because if it wasn't for somebody paying for this to happen, that next department or your boss wouldn't be there. So you've really got to hammer in on value from the customer's perspective. Last, a huge failure mode is this element of discouragement. People get so discouraged because change is hard and it takes time. We have become a culture that is driven, possessed by instant gratification. If my cell phone doesn't download from the internet in the first 10 seconds, I'm pushing the button again trying to figure out why it's not downloading faster. People get discouraged. And here's something that I will tell you. Discouragement's not caused by the lack of progress. Most discouragement by your teams is because of the absence of a clear vision of what they're doing and why it matters and where they're going. Providing people an insight and understanding as to what they're doing and why it's important is worth 1,000 PowerPoint slides. Now, here's some of the common failure modes. I want to look at some of these. You probably experienced a large number of these yourselves. One is too many action items. I've seen events where people come up to me and they say, JR, we'd love for you to review our action item plan and tell us how we can make it better. There's 268 action items on there for 12 people. How in the world are these people going to do all this stuff in their regular job? Focus in on the critical elements and make sure you can do those. One way to discourage people immediately is to be unrealistic in how much work you're putting on them. Make sure you balance that out. Second one, ill-defined or very vague action items. Or we're going to reduce defects by 30%. Well, that's a wonderful goal, but as long as you do that by the year 2050, you've made the goal, right? Big deal. No, be very specific. We're going to reduce these type of defects by 30% in the next 90 days. Be very specific, and your people can then measure their success or failure of their actions and activities. Again, you get people very discouraged when they don't know whether or not what they're doing matters. Third, no regularly scheduled meetings. It is incredibly important you guys have structure in after the event, as well as how you use the tools and techniques. Make sure people know you're going to continue to provide an effort ongoing, and here's what you've got to do. In fact, we have a commitment letter that we ask the participants and their supervisors to sign before the event ever kicks off. And it says, you're going to be required to do this, 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 and this, and attend these meetings and provide these services. That way no one can say afterwards, I didn't know that there was a follow-up to this. I thought we just came up with ideas and you guys just handled it. Well, no, there's something very specific in there. Another one is allowing people to drop out or not show up to the follow-up meetings. Guess what? Everybody's busy. Everybody's got reasons and rationales for why they can't be there. I don't know of too many people in the business world that are really looking around for something to do because they're not busy enough. Almost all of us are swamped. We've got too much to do. And having people check out is a great way to have your team begin to fall apart. So figure out how to make sure people show up to those meetings. Next, the meetings aren't very useful. I don't know about you. You probably don't experience this, but I and a lot of my clients find that a lot of the meetings we go to don't get anything done. They're time wasters. It's because we don't have an agenda and we don't focus in on the critical items. We just start talking about everything and wondering our way through. Another failure mode is when people can't see or experience any changes, especially long term. Well, you guys said you were going to go do all these things. We said that we were going to have these changes and it was going to be beneficial. I'm not seeing anything. Greatest way in the world to demotivate people is to A, not let them see any change, and B, not constantly communicate to them about what's going on and why it's going on and what the time frame is. Creating reasonable expectations goes a long ways towards eliminating item number 6 from the failure modes. Number 7, a lack of effective planning. All of us are busy, and we always assume that we can just do it by the seat of our pants and when I'll deal with tomorrow. I like to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. Occasionally I have a plan E. And not one of those plans ever goes the way that I thought it would go. But by having a plan, I have something to deviate from and a way of maintaining focus and direction. A lack of effective follow-up and follow-through. Are you making sure people are doing what they said that they were going to go do? Just asking them 2 or 3 months later is not going to get it done. You can't make a nuisance of yourself, but you have to have enough structure in there so that people always know what they're doing and that somebody's paying attention and that there's consequences if I don't get this done. There's some lessons learned from all of this. What we do as Lean Six Sigma practitioners is essentially we're changing culture. We're doing it one process at a time, and that takes years, not months. And our senior leadership have got to be out in front of this. It's most effective when it's owned and driven from the bottom up, but it must be supported and acknowledged from the top down. The biggest challenge that we have in any of this is not learning the statistics. It's not learning the tools. It's not learning the software. It's not learning the different flow charts. It is in how do we get people to sustain change long term. And if we can do that, we can unlock the potential that every organization has to truly become world class. Here's something that I've learned. The difference between school and life is that school gives you lessons, then a test. Life gives you a test, then you get to learn the lessons. I'm going to tell you something. I also teach at Drexel University. I love it. It's a pleasure for me to work there. But I'm not very interested in theory. I'm far more interested in practical application. How do we make this work long term? What do we do with it? How do we use it? What makes it work? What doesn't make it work? Understanding how people think and how people react, that's where you're going to become an effective practitioner and an outstanding change agent. The real key ingredient, here's what we're talking about. It's got to be passion. Passion on your part. Passion to understand exactly what you're doing. You got to be dedicated to becoming a change agent, and that's hard work. You've really got to understand your particular culture, your organizational dynamics, your team, your people, and that includes both their limitations and their potentials. One of the things that I've found that has helped me be very successful is the team that I put together, making sure that you select other people to work with you that are dependable, who will do what they tell you that they're going to do, that they've got a strong character, they keep their commitments. They're not somebody who promises something and then never delivers. What I have learned long term is that if we're going to be world class, if we're going to truly change the world as Lean Six Sigma practitioners, we need to become more excited about what we can become than we are proud of who we are. I love to tell people that change is good, and it is. We live in a world where everything around us is changing. Our society is changing. Culture is changing. Politics is changing. Healthcare is changing. Our technology is changing. Everything is changing. But yet almost all of us spend an inordinate amount of time trying to maintain the status quo, trying to figure out exactly how to keep things the way that they are. If you can figure out how to make somebody else go first, you're a winner. That's how people look at this. In fact, I think it was National Geographic had this documentary on penguins, of all things, and it showed how the penguins would come out to the edge of the iceberg, and they would all look over the edge of the iceberg, and then they would start flapping their wings and beating on the other penguins, trying to knock one off of the iceberg first. And when one finally got knocked in, they watched. If the penguin got swallowed by a sea lion or a leopard seal, they'd all wander back onto the iceberg. But if they didn't, they would all jump in and go fishing. Human behavior is very similar. We love to talk about change, but we all like to see somebody else go off the iceberg first. The second element, the velocity of change, can actually break your organization. To become an effective change agent, it's one thing to push the sustainability of this, but don't push too many of these events too quickly, because you've got to give the organization a chance to integrate and assimilate these changes to where the new process becomes the old process. Then I'm ready for the next one. So understanding how people think about change can help you become a change agent that significantly changes the ratio of your successes and failures, and go from that 60 to 80% of all change initiatives fail to 60 to 80% of all your change initiatives succeed. I have really enjoyed this opportunity to talk to you. I would deeply appreciate the opportunity to answer any of your questions and to learn from you, because frankly, every time I do these, I learn more from you than you could possibly learn from me.
JR, I just want to thank you so much. This is a fantastic presentation. I liked your examples, and I just want to let the audience know that you're welcome to ask questions. We had a few questions already, but those were logistics questions, and I'm monitoring the questions here, and so far there's only one comment by Ellen that she liked the talk, and she agrees with what you said. And once again, to all the audience, you can type the questions in the questions window, and I can coordinate the questions with JR here.
I know if I was sitting out there in your seats, I'd have a ton of questions.
We have mostly comments pouring in here. They really like your presentation, and they really like the points you made. Well, we have a question here by Glenn, and what he's asking is, what can you do if a new CEO comes in and they do not support the sustainment or accountability?
Man, that's a great question, and it's one that I've actually, because I went through 7 corporate mergers in my corporate life, I had a chance to experience this more than once. The best thing you can do is show results. You have to speak the language of business executives, which is cost, sales, orders, EBIT, and ROI. You've got to show the person who's not supporting this that this can help them achieve the things that they do want to do. The way that I have found it to be very effective is when I shift gears from the language that I've been using into their language, and I focus the efforts that I and my teams are doing to helping solve the things that they tell us are very important. Here's something that I've learned. People will argue with your data and your programs all day long. They will never argue with their own data and their own initiatives. So it doesn't matter where the events and the efforts come from. What matters is the results that we get from how we work with people to implement these changes. So if I've got somebody who doesn't support what we've currently been doing, I will find out exactly what it is that keeps him or her awake at night, and I'll figure out how to shift what we're doing from where we were to what they want to do, and then I will show them the results that our efforts and our methodology is having to solve his or her problems. And I have found that within 12 to 18 months, I can turn a strong negative into a very strong positive. In fact, it's like a smoker. Some of the best supporters I've ever had as executives have been the people who have resisted me the most in the beginning. Great question.
Thank you, JR. We have another question by Joe. Can you role play a conversation you would have with someone who is deeply resistant to the plan change?
Yes. Would he like for me to role play it with him? Or I'm not sure I understand what he would like for me to do.
Yeah, I think it's more. I think the question is more of a anticipating how to deal with the person if he is deeply resistant with the change.
Yes, I think I've got it. And it's very common to have one or two people on every team really not like what they're doing. In fact, they're prisoners. They've been told that they've got to go participate on this, and they don't believe in it, and they've probably been there long enough to see a lot of things that didn't work. What I sometimes will do is I start the question, and I start the discussion by asking more questions than telling. A big mistake that we can make when we're trying to deal with somebody who's resisting the change, or who's not on board, or who is actually trying to work against what we're doing, is we initially jump right into explaining to them why this is a great idea and why they need to be on board. I found that to be not a great approach right out of the gate. What's far more effective is asking that question to tell me a little bit about what their experience has been. What are they doing? How is this problem that we're working on affecting them? What do they see is the right approach and the right solutions? My first element always is going to be to gather information from this individual who is sometimes very passionate about not wanting anything to do with this. The more I can find out about what drives and motivates him or her, the more I can understand how to go about showing them what this can go do. If I ask leading questions that get them to tell me a story, I'm going to learn something. If I ask questions that get them to tell me yes or no, I can get some information, but it's not going to be useful. So to role play that, I would certainly begin to ask them as many questions as I could about them and their experience with this process or this challenge that we're facing, so that I can see what's driving them, what's motivating them, why do they take the position that they do. Before I can ever start to tell them why I think it's the right thing to do, I truly need to listen with the willingness to be influenced on where they're coming from and value that. I have to truly understand why they take that position. When I do that, I find that my success ratio at converting them to supporters goes up dramatically.
Thank you. We have another one here, and this is by Joshua. How do you influence resistors who are established in the company and when you are new and much younger?
I've actually got a coaching column that I have done for ASQ on that precise issue, and it's age versus experience. The best thing that you can do, again, is it boils down to an issue of respect. You've got to gain credibility and gain respect from them, and it's about showing results. Oftentimes, people who have been there for a long time develop an attitude that they've seen it all and done it all. And one of the things as I'm coaching those type people, I'll often ask, have you got 25 years of experience here, or have you got 1 year of experience 25 times? Because that has a great deal to do with how they see new people. The key element for a new, younger person to gain credibility is again, I'm going to kind of reiterate what I said on the last answer, because there's a lot of similarities in the approach. You've really got to understand what's driving and motivating this person who doesn't accept you either for your youth or your inexperience. And both of those, by the way, may be completely off base. I've had the privilege to work with some young people who were incredibly talented and gifted, and who provided tremendous input to a team, even though they were very young and by some people's eyes inexperienced. So helping you to understand why they take the position that they do will help you know where to focus your efforts to show them the right experience, the right credibility. You've got to really help them see the value that you can bring. And for a lot of people, it's like they're from Missouri. You just got to show them. And the other thing is, don't expect that to resolve itself quickly. It will not. It will take time. And the amount of time will be completely dependent upon the individual's personality and the level of skepticism that they have developed over the years.
All right. Thanks, JR. I just want to remind everyone, actually, we are, it's 2 o'clock here in Eastern Time, and we are on the clock here. If at this point, if anybody has to leave, they can leave. We will continue questions for about next 5 to 10 minutes, if it's okay with JR. And if anybody wants to stay on, can stay on. But as a reminder, this presentation and the next 10 minutes will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division website within 10 days, so that you can go back and refer to these questions. We had a couple of questions that people joined late, or they want to show this presentation to their management, and they're more than welcome to from the Lean Enterprise Division website. At this time, before continuing, I want to thank you, JR, and I want to thank you everyone who attended on behalf of the webinar committee. And I just want to remind our next webinar is coming up in January. So JR, we're going to go back to the questions here, if you are okay with it.
I'd be delighted to stay and answer questions, and I tell you, there's a lot of scar tissue in some of these positions that I take, but I'm still learning so much every day. The only thing I find that's pretty applicable in the black belt, master black belt versus the Japanese martial arts thing is that the more you learn about this, the more you really truly realize how we're just scratching the surface on understanding all of this. I have so much left to learn, but I am delighted to stay here and talk to anybody who wants to talk who would be interested whatsoever.
Okay. What I'm going to do is there are some questions which are similar, so I'm going to jump a couple of them. There's one question here is, what do you say to a leader, director level of the department, who says, I don't need to understand what is happening at the operation, that is up to the manager? And that's by Ellen.
Ellen, you have my deepest condolences. That's a tough situation. As an executive and as a business leader, I have found that I always need to understand as much as I can about what's going on in my organization. For individuals who think that they don't, the best thing that you can do is to provide them very sharp, short, succinct situational updates on the things that you believe or that you've learned would be of interest to them. Oftentimes, that individual probably has got a personality profile that would be a driver, very dominant. They're very short, very focused. So finding a way to figure out what does interest them and then converting what you and your team are doing into what he or she wants to hear is probably the best approach. The second best approach would be to focus in on his or her direct reports and make sure that they know what you and your team are doing and hope that that can filter up to him. I've also had success with a third approach, and that is making sure that the vice president that that director reports to knows exactly what I and my team are doing. So that's the three elements that I would do, and that's pretty much the order that I would do them in.
Thanks, JR. This is a question by Ashok, and what he's asking is the levels of resistance you explain in the order of intensity. I mean, is he asking, are these in the order of intensity? That what it means is level 3 is more difficult to deal with than level 1, but how to deal if you deal and overcome with level 1 and level 2 and you encounter level 3 later?
Absolutely. These are absolutely in order of intensity. They become more difficult to solve and resolve as you go up the scale. You have to learn how to recognize which level you're in. I've got an entire webinar series on just these levels of resistance because I have found, believe it or not, this is probably as important or more important for my success as a black belt and master black belt than to know how to use the statistical tools. Because if I can't get people on board, if I can't get people bought in, it doesn't matter how well I can use statistics. Nothing's going to change. So learning how to understand why people resist, recognize the levels that they resist, and this is an escalating scale, and then learning the different approaches for how to deal with and understand these levels of resistance is hugely beneficial for anyone who wants to be a change agent of any kind in any organization.
Okay. The next question is by Dawn, and she's asking, you mentioned that you have to be careful not to send a mixed signal to an organization. Do you have any suggestion on how to bring attention to such mixed signal without driving people away?
Absolutely. That's, you know, you do walk a very fine line there. If people view you as being critical, they'll turn you off. If they see that you're not providing something that is important, they'll tune you out. I have found that if you can use humor, like I tried to do in this presentation, if you can use examples where people see it and it's intuitively obvious immediately, hey, this is mixed, you know, do no entry only. That photograph is so powerful because people see it and they immediately recognize exactly what you're trying to tell them. So the way that I would try is gain experience or examples from the organization that you're using, and then try to find some type of photograph or image that replicates that, because people see visuals and they get it. They don't have to process it. There's not a lot of chance of misunderstanding what you're trying to do. Once they get it, they're on your side. If you're trying to explain it, you're not gonna reach as many people. So using visual representations and humor is by far the best way that I have found to walk that line from not being viewed as overly critical and not being irrelevant. I hope that helps, but that's a difficult situation always, because communication is something we do so poorly, you know, as a people and as a society. I can't tell you who it is, but not too long ago I got hired by an international organization that specialized in helping other organizations learn to communicate. And ironically, what we went in to help them was their internal communications. No one does it perfectly. Some people do it okay. Most of us struggle with it. So this element of how to make sure that our message is clear and unambiguous without mixed signals is worth all of the effort that we put onto it.
This question is asked by actually more than 2 people, so let's take only a couple more questions. I just want to remind everyone that they have the access to JR by email, and he'll be happy to answer any questions if we don't get to all of it. So this question is asked, again, going back to the question, they want to know that they are facing issues mostly with the middle level manager. They show resistance. What to do after gaining executive support, but how to handle the resistance from the mid-level managers?
To make sure that I fully understand the question, is this the mid-level managers don't buy in, or they find that their interest wanes and degrades over time?
Okay, let me read the exact question. Do you have any suggestion to convince middle management? Usually production floor workers are convinced, but I have struggled more with the middle management, such as supervisors.
Absolutely. In fact, I almost included a slide in today's presentation on precisely that. I've got an hourglass that shows that the executives at the top buy into this at some point, or they wouldn't be paying you to go do it. Once you go do the exercises and the events and start doing this, the people at the worker level get very excited about it. It's the mid-level managers, which is the narrowing of the hourglass, where change initiatives get choked off and die. Here's why I think this is. Mid-level managers have spent their career climbing and learning and developing skills that put them where they are today. And mid-level managers don't get the opportunity to be very strategic. They're trying to get things done today. They live and die by their results from today. And there's 2 things that they focus on relentlessly. One is results, and the other one is to mitigate or minimize risk. Anything that changes or anything that can interfere with results is risk. And think about it for a second. We come in as green belts, black belts, and master black belts, and we're told to go fix this area. Oftentimes, the mid-level managers aren't consulted. They just know, hey, some outsider's coming in, and they're going to change this process. And, you know, I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to get me fired. They're going to make my life miserable. And here's all this extra work, and we don't have enough people and time to get what we're doing done today. Any of this sound familiar to you guys? Because it sounds familiar to me. And now I'm coming in here and doing this and coming up sometimes with what's viewed as happy talk on how much better it's going to be, when all they've seen is I have to work my butt off to get this done today or I'm not going to survive. So the mid-level managers are often the last ones to go to training or to get exposed to Lean Six Sigma, and they're the first ones to have it done to them, not done with them, and they see what we're doing as risk by some outsider who doesn't understand what they have to do to survive every day. It doesn't surprise me that mid-level managers are the biggest resistors. What surprises me is that we struggle so hard with understanding how to address their concerns. Once we understand why they feel that way, and we recognize that the way that they feel is legitimate, then we can go in there and address their concerns and show how this is going to help them and benefit them, as opposed to something that's going to create a nightmare for them. It takes a lot of work. Again, unfortunately, most of this Lean Six Sigma stuff is not easy. It's difficult. That's why so many people get trained in it, and so few of us actually become good at it.